Let's start over again for the fourth or fifth time. My name is Laskin. I'm a senior solutions architect with Sauce Labs. I'm not going to ask you guys to raise your hands again. I know everyone knows who Sauce Labs is. That's very good. I have the distinct pleasure of being an American, probably the only actual American here, but I also was born in St. Petersburg, so despite what I said earlier, I completely understand everything you guys say. I speak Russian fluently. You can ask me questions in Russian or English, I don't care. So get that out of the way. My background actually comes from over a decade in the quality assurance space. I did everything from manual testing with Excel spreadsheets to going off and starting to write automation using QTP back then and UFT, Silk Test. And then I went to a small startup and they said to me, look, Leo, we don't have the money to pay, I think it was $15,000 a seat license for UFT at the time. Find us an open source tool. So I went and I started Googling around, looking around for tools, and I found this tool called Selenium. I know based on Lubosh's talk that many of you were just in, that quite a few of the folks here know what Selenium and Appium are, so that's really good. I actually joined the Selenium project as well, and I've been an open source contributor to Selenium for the last 7 years. So I'm very involved in the Selenium community with both the application itself as well as Selenium conferences all over the world, in Europe, the US, and of course India. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about CI/CD for mobile applications and websites and how we're moving more and more towards that realm as we start developing new applications. So CI/CD is really made up of this, what I call a buzzword salad. All these words have something to do with CI/CD, everything from Kubernetes to Kanban to shifting left. It's the big thing everyone's talking about now. One of the words I see on here is actually this word DevOps. 5 years ago, if you asked me what a DevOps person was, that was the guy who was fixing our computers. It was IT. He'd build a server here or there, but it wasn't a practice. It wasn't something that everybody was doing. Now DevOps is usually an individual team. It's a large team at Sauce. We have more DevOps people than of any other department. All they do is maintain our infrastructure for testing. And this is all part of this strategy of moving more and more towards shifting left, that you have these individual departments doing these very specific and specialized tasks. So the whole point as we try to get to CI/CD, why do we need CI/CD? What is the value? Well, really it's all about what's going to make us money. Right? As a company, your company wants to make money, and the only way to do that is to do things faster, do things more efficiently. And so the goal, to get to money, what we need to do is we need, well, more sales, right? And to get more sales, we need more users. And how do we get more users? Well, we give the users what they want, right? If we give them something they don't need, then they're not going to buy our products. And the way we do that is by providing it to them in an efficient and rapid manner. So we have to be more agile. We have to deliver quality software more frequently to the market. We have to be releasing on a daily, hourly, by minute basis if need be. And as we move more towards a continuously integrated, continuous delivery world, you're able to do that. The only way we're going to be able to do this though, is by continuously testing. We have to be testing nonstop. The example I always like to give is if we have 100 test cases, quick question, anyone in the room manager? Okay, in the back. Russian or English, what do you want? По-русски или по-английски? Что легче? Все равно. Even better. So if I have 100 test cases and I run them once, and I come to you and I say 100% pass rate, are we good to deploy? I hear a lot of no's. Okay, I'm okay with that. So instead, I'm doing continuous testing. I ran those 100 test cases 10 times in a row, 1,000% pass rate. Are we good to deploy? It's pretty good, right? 1,000%, I'm pretty sure. Yeah? Good to deploy, yeah? Say yes. That's pretty good. No, he still doesn't want, it's not enough. Okay, okay. Now here's what I'm really going to tell you, and this is where continuous testing really wins out. If instead I went to that Leo guy's talk and I listened and I test all the time and I ran these test cases 10 times in a row, and the 8th time I identified that on our e-commerce website the customer would no longer be able to check out. Every 8 customers would not be able to purchase our product. I just saved the company $1 million. We're not ready to deploy, but you're happy because you found a bug and we didn't deploy. No, you're still not happy? I can't please you ever. I'm sorry. So look, the path to CI/CD is something that we've all gone through. We're at some stage that we're going to see here. First off, we start with the waterfall model, right? We all know what this is. This is the way it used to be. Maybe I heard some people in the hallway earlier talking that you're still doing waterfall, where QA and developers, they don't talk, they're not friends, they hate each other. You're all manual testing, there's really no automation. And basically developers are like, I'm done with the feature. Throw it over the wall and give it to the QA team, and the QA team tests and says, no, it's all broken, and sends it back and forth and back and forth. Very inefficient. Now, a lot of companies that I see are actually doing what we call fast waterfall. They're at an initial adoption of Agile. They're doing some Scrum methodology. They're starting to write automated tests. And of course, development and QA are starting to communicate. They're starting to be friendly with each other. They're starting to really collaborate. As you move towards continuous integration, where you're integrating branches, feature branches constantly, we'll see some of that in a little bit. Automated testing really starts to dominate. You're writing more and more automated tests. Manual testing is minimally used, only for debugging, only to maybe reproduce an automated test case to verify that, yes, it really did break, or, hey, where did it break? And of course, dev and QA are collaborating closely. They might be sitting next to each other. They might be working on the same teams. You might be meeting in the same meetings all the time, being in the early parts of the Scrum, in the sprint planning meetings, etc. QA may be part of that process. And then finally, we get to the goal. We get all the way left, and we're at continuous delivery. Everything is automated. We're deploying completely automated. We're doing that all using pipelines that we'll see in a little bit. And there's no such thing as QA. There's no such thing as dev. There's just engineers. And you see companies like Google and Facebook, Microsoft, these large companies, they're not hiring testers anymore. They don't have QA people or QEs or SDETs, none of that. They only hire engineers because they expect that engineers are fully responsible for quality. Dare to dream, right? So here's what's happening in the industry. You have to be able to change all of these things in your company to make it work. First, you have to change the way your company thinks, philosophy. You got to do some organizational changes, change in your application structure, how you do your code versioning, and of course, your development process. We're going to talk about a few of those today. And then, of course, we'll finish up with deployment. So, philosophical changes is talking about how long it takes for us to fail versus how long it takes for us to recover. And the way I want you to think about this is, we can deploy a bad build to production and recover from it instantaneously once a bug is found. That's okay. Or we can deploy a really great build to production, and when someone finds a bug, it takes us a long time to redeploy and recover from that. It's not, neither one of those worlds is really good. Ideally, you deploy really good builds to production, and if a bug is found, it's a 5-10 minute turnaround for you to be able to fix that issue. So you really want to try to work on that. You want to be proactive on this versus reactive. The other thing you want to think about is also the cost around deploying. If it takes you a long time to deploy, if you have server outages and downtime, you may end up actually with a significant cost to deploy. It'll cause you some issues. Sorry, a little error on the screen here. The other thing as well is reliability, right? We talked about staying up for long periods of time. And then, of course, some of the companies that I've seen be really successful provide incentives for long uptimes. They'll actually give out, a couple of bucks here and there just because you have a really good build and you have a really good release. And then this also builds perception of your product, not just of your actual physical product, but the product that we as quality engineers are putting out. Because we're the final gatekeepers, right? We are the ones that say the product is ready to ship. Well, except for that guy, he never says it's ready to ship. Or that it's not, right? And so we are the ones that need to be perceived as being good and knowing what we're doing. Now, organizationally, we also have to change, right? So first off is, how are developers going to move? We talked about this, right? Developers must be responsible for the quality of their code. They have to be QA on their own. As part of this, the role of a tester really starts to go away. The pure tester that we think of is disappearing in today's market, in today's software engineering world, because everyone is starting to be responsible for quality. Not even just developers. I see product managers doing quality stuff. And of course, everyone is starting to write all of the necessary tests and ensuring that the entire build and deployment can go smoothly. We're really starting to get these cross-functional agile teams that are able to work together. Everyone from a product manager to a UX designer to a UI designer, development, QA, they might sit in an individual pod together and be able to really collaborate and get things done very quickly with very good communication. And again, everyone is friends, always very helpful. Now, there's also some application changes you have to be aware of. One of the conversations that I have very often with some of my compatriots in the Selenium community is whether to do monolithic repositories. How many of you guys here are in a monolithic repository model where you work? I see a couple of raises of hands. So monolithic repository is a single repository for all of your code where everything lives. You don't have anything broken up into microservices. You do one big deploy, you take your entire environment down, you deploy, you put it back up. Now, I'm a much bigger fan of actually splitting everything up into microservices as much as possible. This is going to allow you to do stage deploys, piecemeal deploys, where you're going to be able to identify exactly what needs fixing, exactly what was broken, and just do it piece by piece. You're also going to be able to start mocking these services out. As each of your pieces of your application is split out into a microservice, you're going to be able to know, well, if I'm testing a piece over here, I don't really care about anything that's going on over there, so I can just ignore that and stub it out and have it give me fake output. And then, of course, as part of this, you're going to be doing some contract testing, where you're actually verifying that the APIs that you have and you're using as part of your mock testing are actually going to be giving you the output that you're doing. This may be done at, and probably is done at a unit test level, but it should be something that you're constantly thinking about. Now, as process changes, we can talk about the old Scrum model. We have sprint versus Kanban. I'm a much bigger fan of Kanban than I used to be. I started off being a big sprint guy and not really understanding what Kanban was. And then I realized that sprints lead you in a sort of a false dichotomy or a false sense of positive feeling because you always overpromise and you always underperform and it's okay somehow. And that can't be okay. We can't be promising to deliver a feature and then it comes out 6 months later because we overpromised. Instead of Kanban, you really can only take on what you can take on. Once it's done, it's done. This way you never really have to promise anything other than vagaries and say, hey, I think the feature will come out Q3. It's a 3-month period. This way the salesperson isn't breathing down your back saying, I have customers waiting for the feature. No one likes that. Also, you're going to start doing time-based versus event-driven testing. So you're going to be saying, well, look, we have a window we need to test in. We have a certain amount of time that we're going to be able to get our testing done in, and we need to get it done, and that's it. The other thing, too, is there's actually a psychological paradigm that after about 5 minutes, the adult human mind is off onto the next topic. You're already thinking of something else. So someone in this room, I guarantee, has checked their email on their cell phones or pulled out their laptop and read something. Who knows? And that's just because it's a normal psychological thing. I'm not offended, I promise. But what you need to realize is that developers are worse. They have like a 3-minute time window, not a 5-minute one. So what happens is when they change from one feature to the next, they automatically forget things. And so if you give them results a day later, a week later after you finished your regression, how many different features may they have worked on in that time frame? You want to get information back to those people as quickly as possible because you're time-based testing versus event-based. And so then you're actually giving them that really great information that they can go back and instantly be like, oh yeah, that bug, I know exactly where that is. I just worked on it. I'm going to go into my code. I just fixed it. I'll take care of it. I already have the sprint repo, the repo checked out, no problem. Or if you come to them a week later, well, I got to check out that repo and I got to rebuild my VM and download some new services and all sorts of other stuff. How long does it take? So meanwhile, you're breaking your perception, right? We talked about that a little more. You're hurting your perception. From a deployment standpoint, making use of tools like Docker and Kubernetes to be able to deploy microservices piecemeal throughout your application is going to allow you, again, to do individual pieces and do staged deploys, where you're going to be able to do very large changes, but small pieces at a time, and they're less noticeable to your customers. They're less likely to affect the bottom line or the business. Now, the modern development tool chain is actually really interesting. A lot of people don't realize that it's really a mix of dev and ops, which is DevOps. So you start off looking like this. Where in this do you start? Well, if you're a brand new company, chances are you're probably starting at this plan phase if you're starting brand new. And you'll work your way around to coding and building and releasing and deploying. But something very important is missing here, right? Throughout this entire chain, we're missing testing, right? Testing happens all the time, constantly. And it never stops, right? With continuous testing, you test after you code, you test after you build, you test after you release, you test after you start operating and you're monitoring. Even monitoring is a type of testing that you're using to identify that your site is up and running, right? Or that customers are able to go and log in and check out and purchase things. So you need to be thinking that you are constantly testing, because if you're not, you're gonna miss things. A quick example of what I mean when I say this is that after you code, you're gonna have a pull request. Part of the test of that pull request may be automated unit tests that run. Heck, I saw a talk earlier today someone was giving where they talked about how in their pull request, someone found a bug and they had to go in and rewrite it. They put a comment in the PR that said, hey, this isn't right, this is completely wrong. And that's still testing. It might not be an actual automated test or manual test someone ran, but just the fact that someone's reading your code, that's testing. Then once you get into the testing here before you've built, that's when you're running your unit tests, before integration, before any end-to-end testing or journey testing, depending on what you call it. And then finally, after you've built, you can go do that end-to-end testing. Here now, you start doing more of that end-to-end testing. It continues to be end-to-end here until you come back here and start doing PR level, unit level testing. So how does this all apply to mobile application testing, right? What does this all matter? Well, with mobile, we have to think of rapid deployment. And it may not be that you're rapidly deploying the application to the iTunes store or the Play Store, but rapidly you may be changing backend servers, you may be changing databases, etc. What you need to think about is that you need to be using all the tools available for you in mobile. Now, the first is emulators and simulators. These are easy to find. You download the iOS simulator with Xcode, the Android emulators of all shapes and sizes with the Android Studio. But the issue with them is that they're timely to spin up. They do take significant amounts of time to spin up. And I personally am of the opinion that Apple is on a mission to slow down their simulator with every single operating system release. I don't know why, but every single one. We at Sauce Labs have 20 different versions of iOS in our simulators. And as you go up in the versions, the simulators take more and more time to spin up. I don't get it. Then of course, as you move further down the release pipeline, you're gonna wanna take advantage of real devices, whether you have real devices plugged into your laptop via USB cable, or you have a grid or a cloud-based provider like Sauce is providing you with real devices. You're able to take advantage of that, and there are reasons to use both. The ideal consideration for testing when testing mobile devices is a mixture of the two. You can't just concentrate on one or the other. You'll actually miss out on a lot. Or, for example, for real devices, you're just going to pay a lot more if you don't combine the two, because real devices, by definition, do cost more than emulators and simulators. Now, from a repository standpoint, we talked a little bit about this. Where do we keep our tests? Do we keep everything in one repo, or do we have a separate testing repo? Do we have our developers mixing tests in with mixing code in with our tests? And I like both schools of thought. I don't have a real personal opinion. I do like the fact that developers are able to write tests in our automation if it's part of the same repository that they're downloading and installing. What I don't like is in most situations, they don't write tests. So we end up doing all the work, and in the meantime, we have to mess around with all the development code to get the tests around that, and that takes a lot of effort. Now, also, you should try to follow a good feature branching strategy when you're doing mobile testing. This is important to write good tests in those branches, and that way you can follow and identify here that, look, we started at master, and this is where our stable release lives, right? Here's our 101, 1.1, 1.1, whatever. And then we have a bug, right? We had a stable release at 1, we had a bug, we had to hotfix it. We worked on that, we developed it while we're working on these major features. Then we had a major feature come out. We were actually able to start the release for 1.1 while continuing to work here. And then finally, with some bug fixes and maybe another hot fix in the middle here, we went to release the final release. And then finally, we had this large feature that we released, and that's where 1.1.1 came out. Whatever the feature may be, it doesn't matter. And don't forget, right, this is time indeterminate. This could be 5 minutes or 5 months or 5 days. It doesn't really matter, right? But the point you got to realize is that an ideal strategy allows you to work on bugs and hot fixes while you're developing multiple releases without having merge conflicts. And this is what you get when you really start doing continuous integration. This is what a good continuous integration workflow looks like. Obviously, with continued deployment, you're going to be doing this, but you're going to be constantly pushing. You could push here. You can, in fact, have this hotfix, push this here, that's continuous deployment, and then continue working. We've integrated 1.1, okay, we'll release. Now, as you're looking to deploy applications, it's a good idea to think of where you're going to be running your tests. So if we have our source code repository here, and we've created some internal builds, these may be zip files for built for specific iOS simulators or debug applications for Android emulators, you're going to want to run those on an emulator simulator just from a cost savings benefit. It's going to save you lots of time. You're also going to want to run these in parallel, and we'll talk about the power of parallel in a minute. As your alpha builds come out, you also may not want to push them up. You can either go straight to Hockey App here with an alpha build, or you may want to push that to an emulator simulator. With beta builds, you definitely want to use a deploy tool such as Hockey App that's going to allow you to deploy rapidly to real devices, to cloud service providers such as SaaS, and then you're going to be able to use real devices to test. You're going to be able to really get that customer experience on that very specific device. If you want to test on some random Huawei that there's no emulator for, well, some cloud provider has it. If you want to test on a phone that no one's ever heard of, we can find it for you. And then of course, finally, your release build, you're going to want to test that on a mixture of real devices and potentially a physical device in your hand. Once it's finally made it into the store, you can download it using Google Play services and then actually test it finally. So don't forget, but inside of all of this, we're still continuing to use our cycle of testing, right? So here we continue to test. Emulator simulators can be everywhere. Real devices don't really belong here. They don't really belong at the code stage because we're not going to have a build that's built for that real device. But now, especially once we're on the right side of this cube, of this circle, where we deploy, where we have monitoring, that's where real devices come into play. So what about web? Well, there's some lessons that I've learned from web that realistically, everything applies to web that applies to mobile, and just about vice versa. There's very little that I can take in web testing that I can't apply to my mobile testing, and the same goes for the other thing. The one thing that web does that I feel is a little easier than from a mobile standpoint is cross-browser testing. Look, there's hundreds and thousands of different types of cell phones out there with tons of different OSs for them. Whereas for cross-browser, realistically, it's 4, maybe 5 browsers, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, IE, and IE Edge. There's that random person somewhere, probably in this country, using Opera. It's one person, I swear. You don't worry about them. They don't matter. And of course, fast results for web users are actually less vital than for mobile. The mobile users, there's a statistic that says that if someone tries a mobile app and it doesn't work for them once, there's a 47% likelihood they'll never open that application again. If you're a large business, if you're a financial institution and you want customers to use your mobile banking application and it doesn't work the first time they try it, they're never going to use it again. So now, what does a good pipeline creation look like for CI/CD style testing? Well, it's 5 very simple steps. You're going to have a setup of your pipeline where you're going to download your repository, configure any configurations for your tests. Then you're going to run your unit tests. Once those pass, you're going to build. You're going to run your end-to-end tests, and then you're going to ship your product out to production. Now, I actually like to also think that unit tests can be run as part of step 4, because I like to break my end-to-end tests out into individual unit tests before I run the journey. If you, for example, take the Amazon workflow, the very basic e-commerce, or if you're using AliExpress, whatever the case may be, or Allegro, I saw someone here from Allegro earlier, so I have to give them a shout out. If you're using one of those sites, the workflow that you'll go through is simple. You're going to search for an item you'd like to purchase, click on the item, click the Add to Cart button. You're going to log into your account. It's going to prompt you for an email and password. And then you're going to check out. Now, I've oversimplified it into 5 steps, right? But obviously, it's much more complex. But that's an end-to-end flow. Now, if search fails, because of the way assertion paths work with some languages, I might end up filing 5 bugs because I wasn't able to add to cart, I wasn't able to log in, I wasn't able to check out. But all because search failed. Everything else could have worked fine. So instead, I like to take that end-to-end journey and not run it until I'm sure that each individual piece works. And that's where mocking and stubbing comes into play, where you use APIs and databases that you pre-configure to have items pre-added to your cart, to have accounts pre-created, to have a credit card pre-added to the account, and so on. All of these things are super important. And before you come to doing full end-to-end, you can save yourself lots of time by running many of those atomic and autonomous tests in parallel quickly together. So the pipeline results look sort of like this. Every time you build, you're going to first do that checkout where you've gotten something from your source control, whether it be Git or Mercurial or Subversion or whatever you may be using. Then again, you're going to do that setup where you're going to deploy those Docker and Kubernetes containers that we talked about earlier. Run your unit tests. Once that passes, you can see you build. You see that we never really go past some of these. They fail, so we never actually end up here in many of these builds. But then finally at this last build, we got good unit tests, so we built that. It succeeded. Our end-to-end tests were good, and then finally we deployed, we pushed to production. Customers are ready to go. This is really what an ideal workflow looks like. This is where you want to end up if you're running your pipelines properly, that you just have these green builds. And when managers see green, they see money in the long run. So what you want to think about is this almost should become subconscious, that they're constantly seeing green. Everything is constantly pushing successfully and you're getting green builds. And then one day you're going to come in, or your manager is going to come in, they're going to look at your dashboard, and all of a sudden something turned red. They're used to seeing green. It's a psychological thing. When they see red, they're going to come to your office, to your cubicle, to your desk, and say, hey, what's going on? Why is the build broken? Why can't we deploy? We're losing X dollars at this very moment. How do we get that fixed? Trust me, you're going to save the day. With that said, guys, let's do this. Any questions? No questions?
I will ask one.
Sure.
The stack software that you guys use in SourceDAO around this testing, not just like Jenkins, but around like helpers for your workflow, like Sentry.io and so on. So kind of this. Could you cover this?
Sure. Can I ask you a quick question before I answer? Did Neil Manvar pay you to ask me about Sentry.io? The head of sales at Sentry used to be an employee at Sauce Labs, so that's why I asked. We use a lot of different tools for monitoring. Yes, Sentry is one of them. Nagios, New Relic are some of the tools we use. That's more on the DevOps side of the house that they use that. Tools like PagerDuty as well to wake people up in the middle of the night if servers goes down. From a building perspective, from inside of the actual, let's see if I can get this back. So from the actual pipelining, the tools we use here, there's multiple plugins we use inside of our build pipeline. Off the top of my head, I have the list. It's long, but I don't have it in these slides, and I'm not going to lie to you. The biggest things, of course, are the pipeline plugins that are all available for Jenkins to build these pipelines. There's a bunch of plugins that are required for that as well. We also use things like the Jenkins SCM helper plugin that actually helps us to pull down parts of our repo from Git, individual pieces of the microservices that are available in each separate repository.
One more question, simple. How do you track issues? How do you track PRs in SourceDAO? Git or GitHub or Jira?
Yeah, great question. So we use Jira for issue tracking, but we use GitHub for pull requests and code reviews. So we don't use Stash or I think it was Laskin eyes at some point.
That means that you have duplication.
We do have duplication of using two tools instead of one. Yeah, you know, that choice was made before my time. I've always been an Laskin fan, but whoever started the GitHub account really liked GitHub, and so we've used GitHub since then, and I don't think it's about to change.
So the list of issues inside Jira, but list of PRs inside GitHub.
Correct, and there's a plugin for Jira that integrates with GitHub, so it's all integrated.
Slack?
We use Slack as well, yeah, and of course there's plugins for both GitHub and Jira that go into Slack. Our primary communication tool is Slack within the company as well.
Thanks, that's enough. Thank you.
Thanks for a very nice talk. Could you describe more workflow for CI and CD for iOS applications? And so Hockey app, why do you not use TestFlight, for example?
We only support Hockey app at Sauce. I don't know the full reasons why we don't support TestFlight. I can find out for you if you'd like.
Спасибо за доклад. Когда вы говорите о тест-инженерах, вы подразумеваете людей, которые создают архитектуру, программируют и пишут все автотесты и занимаются тест-дизайном. Это все один и тот же человек?
Да, идеально, да. Реально, может быть, нет.
Просто по поводу реальности, то есть есть какой-то код-фикс, его делает один человек. Если, например, он по каким-то причинам не может подкорректировать тут же тесты, получается, там, как вы это решаете? Там, парное программирование с тестировщиком? Или...
Да, ну тесты тоже должны проходить через code-review процесс. И должны делать или парное программирование, или team должен работать на них, ну, как team. Но тоже нужно думать, что если девелоперы пишут тесты, тогда что QA team делает в то время? Они пишут тулы для девелоперов, чтобы они писали лучше тесты или могли быстрее тесты писать, или быстрее их run.
Спасибо за доклад, меня Алексеев. Вот в вашем процессе, который вы сейчас описали, существует ли такой процесс, как QA-review, который связан уже с тем, что человек из QA берет готовые написанные для автотесты и уже смотрит на степень покрытия того или иного функционала в этих автотестах, и потом уже выдает, собственно, дает свой оценки или наоборот говорит, что нужно еще что-то.
Ну, идеально, когда пошли уже на CD, Continuous Deployment, больше человека, чтобы проверять последней степени, что все тесты прошли. Если тут зеленые, все прошли. Мы как...
Я не говорю о другом. Здесь понятно, что мы здесь видим, что весь автотест он работает, он не упал. Вот. Вопрос в другом, что, например, там, в каком-то конкретном автотесте может быть не затронут какой-то функционал.
Вопрос, как автотест и code coverage через functional UI testing, это очень трудный вопрос. Честно, я еще жду найти компанию, которая делает хорошую экзаменацию, какой делает code coverage, functional UI testing. Такие компании нету. Но это, честно, часть, я бы считал, pull request и code review процесс, где нужно проверять, где физически люди должны проверять, не только QA-щики, но девелоперы тоже, что те функции, которые мы написали, что мы тоже для них написали юнит-тесты, functional-тесты и все такое.
Ну, собственно, под ревью это как раз относится к тому, что вы говорили в самом начале, что девелопер должен быть ответственным за свой код.
Да.
И он должен выпускать хороший.
Ну, другие люди должны тоже проверять этот код после они закончили. Даже если девелопер один написал, второй девелопер и второй QA-щик или кто же вы должен проверять этот код. И вот когда проверяется, что есть тесты, которые должны там быть.
Спасибо.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You told that unit tests are important and we know about it. And what about sometimes in my experience, I experienced this one, that developers switch off the unit test to make a successful build, you know, to deploy a successful build.
yeah.
How to ensure them that this is bad?
Well, they know it's bad. So the question for those of you who didn't hear is what happens when developers turn off unit tests? How do we avoid that? Unfortunately, you can't, right? The good news is you keep the developers out of your Jenkins environment so they can't turn it off in Jenkins. They can do it locally. They can turn off unit tests, and it may actually, but in Jenkins, in your CI server, they shouldn't have the rights to disable unit tests, and that's one way to enforce it. The other, of course, is going back to one of my earlier slides about organizational change, right? Make it an organizational rule. I know one company, they have a 3 strikes and you're out policy, sort of like American baseball. The first time you deploy code that did not have good testing around it and it has a bug and it's found in production, they come and they have a conversation. Look, testing is very important here. Please write tests. The second time, you no longer get to deploy code anymore. And the third time, you're fired. They're very strict. So it's one way to enforce it, organizational change. I think,
The difference between D2D and end-to-end?
nothing. The bad QA by the engineer who wrote the presentation. Мне все равно.
Супер. Супер. Мне вот интересно, именно вопрос меня интересует про continuous delivery. Для меня это что-то такое фантастическое, потому что очень сложно совместить в себе действительно хорошего человека и разработчика, и еще сложно совместить в себе хорошего человека, разработчика и тестировщика, который может оценить правильно юзабилити, и насколько, ну, и как это с продуктовой точки зрения, то есть если мы берем тоже Facebook, я не скажу, что у Facebook самый хороший интерфейс и тем более хорошее мобильное приложение. Вот. Как бы, вот как вы добиваетесь этого?
Извиняюсь переводчиками.
Хорошо.
Извиняюсь.
Сложно, я просто думала, не работает. Сложно совместить себе хороший человек, хорошего разработчика, хорошего тестировщика. Для меня это какое-то фантастическое существо. Беря тот же самый Facebook, я не скажу, что с юзабилити с точки зрения, и с продуктовой с точки зрения, не знаю, как с продуктовой, но с юзабилити там точно не очень хорошо. И в мобильном приложении тем более. Вот, как найти такую команду, в которой можно построить continuous delivery?
Я отвечу по-английски, потому что мне будет немножко легче поответить этот вопрос так. So to find a person or a group of people that can really do all these things at once requires, again, going back to that organizational and philosophical change, where developers who historically have not written test cases, have not done good quality releases, that you need to either A, change their way of thinking, or B, find new ones. And it's not easy to do. There's a reason why developers that work for these companies, and I'll explain why Facebook is actually wonderful in a second, end up actually getting paid very, very, very highly. It's because they can do all of these things. It's because they understand all these processes. Facebook actually, you might not like the UI, but their stockholders love it. And the fact is that even though they release bugs and they do stage deploys where they deploy first to 10% of their users, then 30%, then 50%, etc., when they find those bugs, they're fixed instantly. That's what CD is all about.
Здравствуйте, спасибо за доклад. Скажите, я так понимаю, что ваша компания прошла полный путь от manual testing to continuous delivery.
Пожалуйста,
Ваша компания же прошла полный путь от мануального тестирования до continuous delivery. Вот скажите, сколько времени у вас заняло в вашей компании перестройка мышления и людей на continuous delivery?
Да, так что В SOS Labs мы, честно, никогда не начали с manual testing. У нас manual testing вообще никогда просто не было. Manual testing у нас это типа support делает, если баг нас ждется, manual support идет и ищет manual тест. Или не ищет manual тест, а переделывает баг, просто чтобы видеть, что она есть. Но от, давай скажем, fast waterfall до CD нам взяло, ну, и у нас маленькая компания, даже сейчас, это много лет назад мы поменялись, но было 200, сейчас 200 человек у нас работает. Это все равно взяло годы и плюс. Если большая компания, если гигантский enterprise, ну, 10 тысяч человек или больше, я знаю, одна компания взяла 5 лет. И еще работает на этим. Это не быстро.
Спасибо за доклад. Как вы шарите информацию от разработчиков до саппорта через тест?
Одну секунду, я не слышу.
Как вы шарите информацию от разработчиков до саппорта, который проверяет?
От разработчиков до саппорт? Разработчиков, ну... Ну... Я этот процесс не знаю.
Ладно, хорошо. Второй вопрос. Вот у вас в конце было тест. Вы поддерживаете GitFlow. Вот у вас есть несколько релизных стендов. тесты у вас тоже получается несколько версий?
Несколько версий этих тестов?
Да.
Ну да, конечно, если тест должен меняться, потому что продукт меняется, конечно, этот тест должен меняться.
Ну, то есть тоже версион, тот же самый GitFlow.
Да, ну конечно, почему это все, почему есть репозитории, что мы могли менять, и если нужно идти на старую версию, у нас есть старая версия тестов тоже.
Спасибо.
Last call.
What is the weather in Los
In LA, it was 70. It was like 75 last week, but I live in Texas, and it's 75 Fahrenheit, which let's say is like 27, but it's about 28 in Texas right now. My wife told me earlier this morning. One more question.
One small question. What interface do you show testing, test report?
This one here. This is part of the pipeline plugin for Jenkins. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.